There's definitely opportunity for growth, especially salary-wise. As I said, you become very valuable to an organization if you're good at what you do and you gain the respect of your surgeon.
The Job Guppy podcast is on a mission to help career explorers and job seekers find out from real people what a specific career or job is really like on a day-to-day basis. Join me, your host, Chris Hodges, as we dive in and explore jobs with each guest. You'll hear from experienced working professionals with transparent, realistic, and job-specific insight about the daily roles and their career journey. We go on to explore other topics like job search recommendations and income and salaries. You'll hear answers to questions like, do I need to go to college for this job? How much college? What is your work-life balance like? What do you like or dislike, or what would you do different? And if you don't like what you hear about one job role, we discuss alternative job titles to explore related to the same industry. And my favorite part is the end where the guest shares their inspirational insight and recommendations for the next person wanting to get started on their career journey. In this episode, Ronier Abarca discusses a role in the medical field that I had never heard of, the role of intraoperative neuromonitoring. Yes, I said intraoperative neuromonitoring. These are the people that monitor nerve and muscle signals while you are under the spell of anesthesia when being operated on. They help guide the surgical team during surgeries and can prevent long-term catastrophes from happening like paralysis or nerve damage. Ronier does a great job explaining how this procedure unfolds from start to finish. This is a role for those who wish to travel and for those who wish to stay close to home. It sounds like the work-life balance is pretty well too. Listen through to hear his career journey and how you can pursue this career path yourself. Throughout the episode, we also discuss how to go about finding job postings and what kind of income one might expect. Links to specific references named in the interview are on the Job Guppy website. Be sure and subscribe to the podcast to hear details about other jobs and career exploration advice to help with your own career journey.
Hi, I'm Ronier Abarca. I work in intraoperative neuromonitoring. I've been working in this field since 2005. It's a very unknown field. I'm kind of happy to be doing this, help bring a little awareness that we actually exist.
What would be a title? Like somebody, if they were in school, what title would they look at?
CNIM is what we call, CNIM is what we call ourselves. We're certified in intraoperative neurophysiologic monitoring. What we do is basically monitor neurological function during surgery, hence the intraoperative part. Our job is basically to keep the surgeon informed on what is happening with the nervous system or the particular areas of the nervous system where he or she is operating. 90% of what we do is probably going to be spine surgery, neck or back surgery. When you hurt your back, you hurt your neck. You can almost guarantee nowadays that somebody that does what I do is going to be in the room with you monitoring your spinal cord or the nerve roots where the surgeon is going to be operating, keeping that surgeon informed. That's the gist, a broad spectrum of what we do.
How would you break a day down from kind of how early do you get started? Since these are surgeries, you super early?
So most surgeries start at 7 a.m. Most hospitals start at 7 a.m. for surgeries. That means that they're rolling back with the patient at 7 a.m., meaning we like to be there approximately an hour before that to do an informed consent on the patient. When you go talk to a patient, you need their permission to do what we're doing because we're not part of the facility. We're a third entity. You have to set up your equipment. Oftentimes, there's a lot of wait. There's a lot of waiting sometimes if your surgery is not the first one scheduled and you have to wait on other procedures to clear before yours goes. If you're lucky, you get that 7 a.m. start. So, you're showing up on time. You set up your equipment in the OR. You change, scrubs. They like you to wear sterile, clean scrubs from the hospital and you're doing the scrubs that you wear from home. Roll your little cart into the room. Put your equipment that you're going to put on the OR table where, you'll have a different setup. Everybody has a different setup. Laptop, everything connected to you to where your corner of the OR, wherever you hang out. Procedure starts, patient rolls back, anesthesia puts the patient to sleep. At that point, depending on where you're working with or who you're working with, you either start placing your electrodes on the patient. We place anywhere from 8 to 50 electrodes, depending on what's going on.
Do you have these memorized at this point, or is this something you kind of have to consult the diagram each time?
At first, the first few cases that you're out there doing it for, you're going to be sweating it because you're like, trying to remember and, making sure that you're doing everything right. And there's a lot going on around you, anesthesia, putting the patient to sleep, nurses, people finishing setting up all the instrumentation in the room, which is a lot. And oftentimes surgeons can be pushy, and they want to get their case going, so they're like kind of hovering sometimes, like making sure you're going fast, and it's not something you want to do when you're new. But once you get it down, you build those relationships with the staff, the nursing and the anesthesia, and everybody, kind of a little more laid back. Everybody does what they need to do. We all kind of do. It's kind of like an NASCAR pit stop, where everybody just kind of, you're working IV over here. I'm working placing electrodes on the legs. The other anesthesiologist is working on a line. Different things going on at the same time concentrating on this one patient. You get set up, you place all these electrodes. The electrodes that were used, almost all of them are little needle electrodes. So you're placing needles inside the patient into different muscles or in the scalp. We place about 5 or 6 in the scalp most of the time. And then depending if you're doing neck or back surgery, which is most of what we do, is the electrodes are either going to go on the arms or the legs. If you're doing a craniotomy, it could be everywhere. It's going to be mostly in the head. EEG, we monitor brain stems, those are going to be little ear inserts. If you're doing ear surgery, we're going to monitor the facial nerve, which the electrodes are going to be little needles that were placed in different muscles in the face. It just varies. This is something that you learn. You get baselines. They're very important depending, what you're doing. You get baselines before the surgeon starts, because that's what you're comparing, where you're going to get any changes. During the procedure, you basically sit there quietly and look at your screen, run these tests, communicate with your oversight physician, your IP, let them know the different stages that you're in, what's going on, because they can't see the patient. They just, they're just seeing your screen. Let them know what's going on, keeping them updated on all the anesthetic values, the vitals. And if you notice anything that might be a change, you alert your oversight physician, you alert your surgeon, you alert the room, whoever needs to be alerted. The main tests that we're going to run are going to be SSCP, MEP, and ABR. So SSCPs are somatosensory evoked potentials. Those are where we stimulate nerves, individual nerves peripherally, usually at the wrist and at the ankles. And we have certain nerves that we use for certain procedures, and we record those responses in the brain. Depending on what you're doing, every 2-3 minutes during the procedure, if something's going down, you're going to be running them continuously. And then the other one I mentioned was MEP. Those are motor evoked potentials. That's where we actually stimulate the brain through little needle electrodes that we place over the cerebral motor cortex, and we use little electrical shocks to stimulate the cortex, and that signal, it's going to in turn trigger the brainstem, in turn trigger the spinal cord, and then everything else. And we record in various muscles throughout the body. So for like neck procedures, we're going to record all the major muscles in the arms, and then the feet. And for like thoracic procedures, we're going to record basically, arms for control, and then the lower extremity muscles. And we run those periodically as well. And, we'll hope that we kind of stay within a certain range of baseline. Those things can be affected by a lot of different things.
What are you looking for when you're monitoring? What reactions? How would you know something's good or bad on a screen? Like take the ear one where you mentioned, and you have electrodes going along the eye or cheek or something.
So what we're monitoring on those is going to be EMG, electromyography. We're placing electrodes in those different muscles in the face. And so the facial nerve runs right through where the ear is. So when they do ear surgery, that nerve is at risk. They can either retract on it too much, they can get into it. If they do that, if they start irritating this nerve, putting too much pressure on it, it's going to trigger that nerve. It's going to fire. You can get real technical on what causes a nerve to fire, and how nerves work, sodium potassium channels and all that stuff. But basically, once that nerve fires, it's going to make these muscles contract. Maybe big enough to where you can see it, but often those quick little fires are you can't, so we're measuring those little contractions of the muscle. So if we skip some of that irritation, we tell the surgeon, hey, I saw a big burst of EMG or I'm seeing a train, it's consistently firing. It's just not something we want to see, because oftentimes a long sustained train of activity could indicate nerve injury. So we tell the surgeon that. And oftentimes when they visualize the nerve, we'll use a little electrical probe where we control the voltage on it, and they'll stimulate the nerve. fire it on purpose, and we look for a response, and we can identify the nerve. If they stimulate something that they may think is a nerve, but it's all just bloody, and it can look very similar. They're stimulating a blood vessel, thinking that's a nerve, and I don't get a response to it. Okay, now I'm sure this is a blood vessel. Or if they're looking at something and they're not too sure what it is, and they stimulate, and I get a big robust response to it, I'm not touching that. So for these cases are very simple, but we play a heavy role in those cases, because if we misidentify something, it can be catastrophic. If you cut off, facial nerve here, I mean, you're looking at lifelong paralysis of the side of your face. We work very closely with anesthesia because what they do directly affects our monitoring. So there are certain things that they can and cannot do. For instance, when we're running motor evoked potentials, they cannot give paralytics. Paralytics are drugs that disrupt your ability to move. Like, you can't move when you're giving paralytics.
I was going to ask you about that, because if that's some of what you're monitoring for, and that's what the anesthesia is actually doing, is relaxing that response.
Right. Yeah. So they can't give paralytics, which a lot of them don't like. And they can't use gas. A lot of these procedures, they use gas to keep you under. And so what we often request is either full or partial, whatever they'll give us, total intravenous anesthesia, where they keep the patient asleep through a drip, usually propofol, but different things. There's anesthesia is kind of like an art. There's so many different ways that you can do it, and everybody has their own little preferred ways, and depending on the patient and what they can get away with or not. So we work closely with them, requesting, hey, we're going to be monitoring this, and that. If you could do this, or that for us to, if you have a good relationship with them, that's awesome. That's great. That's the best. Because they'll go out of their way and really accommodate you. Sometimes you run into grumpier, usually older ones that don't like doing, and they give you a hard time, or they'll tell you, no, this is what I'm going to do. And if your surgeon's not willing to intervene for you, then you're just kind of have to tell your surgeon, look, I can't get what you need because, it's for X or Y reason. But it's kind of one of those little things that we joke around a lot, just kind of like the fight with anesthesia. If you're lucky, I mean, we've been around long now to where all the new anesthesia students are taught this in school. And so when they come out, they're aware of what we do. They're happily do what they can for us. So it's gotten a lot better since I started. Every surgeon's going to have a different protocol that they prefer when it comes to these changes, if they happen. I work with a couple of pediatric orthopedic spine surgeons here. They do most of the scoliosis correction, which are very big surgeries. Those are probably some of the bigger monitoring montages that we do. And we have a laminated sheet of steps, certain protocols that we follow if I get a change, and like step 1 is like quiet the room, ask everybody to shut off, turn off the radio and alert them of what's going on. And then there's, they're very stringent very strict on the steps that we take, when we get a change. Others are a little more lax. You tell them, hey, I'm seeing this, and we got, obviously it depends from surgeon to surgeon. It depends on the procedure that you're doing. It depends on how high the risks are for each procedure. Not every neck surgery or back surgery is going to be the same. Every one of them is unique to that patient, what's going on to that patient. You have to be able to read what's going on and be able to communicate effectively. One of my big things is with training people or hiring. Previous role, I was an area manager. I managed all of the IOM operations for a company in Louisiana and in Mississippi. And I did a lot of the hiring stuff, and communication is key. I mean, I've seen people who are extremely smart. They know the books in and out. They know everything about intraoperative neuromonitoring. But basically, our job is to tell the surgeon when something may not be going the way that they want it. And you have to be able to gain that trust and communicate confidently.
Communication is kind of a soft skill. You can work on it, but it's not an academic kind of thing. I mean, it surely can't be a showstopper that says there's no future for you here, but if somebody's like interested in it, but how do they work through that?
I have seen people run out of the field that know it in and out, but I mean, they just can't communicate effectively. I mean, they'll kind of roam around from area to area working with new surgeons. And then, I mean, bottom line, if the surgeon doesn't trust you, or if they can't tell when there's a real issue, then it may not last.
I've heard this from different people. Different jobs have different requirements, and it's like if this is a big thing, and if you don't feel like you excel or can excel, or you don't want to excel, and you, even though you might want to be in a field, but that's a big part of it, you may want to think twice before you spend a lot of time investing into all this. If you know up front that's part of it.
That being said, everybody can communicate with somebody else. You just have to find the right person that kind of gets you. So you may have a surgeon that doesn't want somebody who's assertive. They may want somebody who communicates on just very basic, but not very basic, but only like scientific medical terms. I've seen a lot of struggles with that. I have. And I've seen people that I thought weren't going to make it, and they ended up finding a way. And they've made it. And I've seen other people that didn't. Now, I've seen the other way. I've seen people that maybe communicate too well and rely on it a little too much. And they kind of, they play the role well, but when it comes down to it, maybe their skill level isn't as developed. We're basically telling surgeons, neurosurgeons at that, which, if, I could say that to any neurosurgeon's face and they know exactly what I'm talking about. We're telling neurosurgeons, hey, there may be a problem here, and they may not want to hear it, or they want to hear it, but if you're confusing them on what you're telling them, then that's going to aggravate them. Being able to communicate and say, this is it, and oftentimes you're not going to know exactly what's causing it, but you have to be able to say, I don't know, but it could be this. That's the trickiest part.
So let's say you got through the surgery, whatever wrinkles happened, you got through it. Is it you kind of pack up, leave, you stick around for another hour doing paperwork? I mean, is it one surgery per day?
No, it can be. So it could be one surgery per day. It could be 5 surgeries per day. It could be 2 days a week. It could be 5 days a week, 6 days a week, depending if you're on call or not. So most of the stuff that we do is going to be elective surgery. So it's going to be mostly Monday through Friday, with the exception of when you're on call, which most places have, rotating call. You're going to be on call every weekend. The schedule for an intraoperative neuromonitoring fluctuates wildly depending on where you work. There's people that literally work 2 days a week. They don't get paid as much, but
But you said something for a medical field, having a job that's like kind of Monday through Friday, not overnight, on call.
yeah, other than like clinic professionals, you don't get that very often.
That's something your role, or that this job role is conducive to that kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, and your schedule is never set in stone. There's not certain hours, right? Because surgery doesn't start at a certain time and ends at a certain time. It ends when it ends. So, I've pulled 17-hour days at times. It depends on the situation of your company and, who can get into what hospital, who's available to come give you a break. If some companies they send you out on a case and you're there on your own until you're done. Very, 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 very few of us work 40 hours a week in the OR. Very few. Most of the people that do what we do, that was a major problem with managing regions. Like, you have people working 3 or 4 days a week and they start griping, well, over there they're working too. A little spoiled.
Yeah.
But
The rest of the world's working 50, so
yes, correct, right? And you're
that's
like sitting
funny.
there as like a manager, you're like, help me understand. Very few technologists work at one hospital. The main ones that do that are the ones that work for large institutes, big hospitals that have their own in-house intraoperative neuromonitoring. And so they get to
Oh,
keep
so
their
you
equipment
move
there.
around.
Yes, most of us move around. Most of us move around from hospital to hospital and even city to city. I live here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. A lot of the technologists here work in Baton Rouge. They work in Lafayette. They go to New Orleans, both about an hour away. If you work in a place like Dallas or Houston, that's a pretty big circumference that you're in a lot of hospitals. You can, over time, build a relationship with certain physicians. A lot of doctors say, hey, you do all my cases. I'd rather have you in my room. Over time, you can maybe shrink it down depending on your market.
Is this required for surgeries?
It is not required. Certain modalities are the standard of care, and a surgeon can still do something outside of the standard of care. But if something were to happen, he or she may be in trouble litigation wise if you're not following the standard of care. But more and more of the things that we do are becoming the standard of care. There's always been a shortage for intraoperative neuromonitoring. There still is. It's gotten a whole lot better, but this field grew so fast and it's growing so fast that the number of us out there that do this is still very, we're still very high demand. It's easy to find a job in a city that you want to move to. Bigger cities, Austin, Houston, Dallas, are a little more competitive for the technologists. Wages are probably going to be a little bit lower than everyone else because they kind of, people want to go to those places. The company I used to work for here in Louisiana, we did a lot of stuff in Shreveport. Getting somebody to move to Shreveport, unless you offered them six figures, they weren't going to do it. Wage-wise, or across the country, it's beneficial right now for the technologists. It's getting better. When you look at those, I think the median salary shows up for Louisiana is like 68. I know several technologists here that make over six figure a year. I know starting out here is going to be around 60 most of the times, unless you will work for a very small company. They're going to start you out like maybe 50, but they're not going to retain you very long if they do that. It's gotten very competitive here in Louisiana. In Oklahoma, it's going to be closer to that 50, 60 your average. California's going to be obviously, New York's going to be a little higher, but cost of living higher. But I think states or areas that are not major cities, but also not rural, is probably the best for a technologist wise, because there's going to be a high demand, because there's going to be sophisticated and large medical organizations, big regional hospitals with a lot of surgeons that need the service, but there aren't going to be that many technologists.
And is that kind of the starting? Are you saying that's kind of like the starting point around that range?
I would, yeah. Here in Louisiana, I mean, as an owner, I can tell you, unless I train, even if I train somebody, I can start them at 50. I'm not going to keep them for longer than 2 years. They're going to go elsewhere. So I think the average here is going to be around 70, 75. And with experience, the longer you've been doing this, like as I said, I know a lot of people that make over six figures.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. As you build those relationships and you get requested to do things, and that's why I mentioned is at the starting, and it just goes up from there, six figures and above.
These people that might not even hold like management positions, they hold business. They retain business for a company, and so a lot of bonusing going on with that too. Houston, Dallas, I know it doesn't pay as well, just because there's not as much of a shortage of technologists.
Do people that travel tend to make more?
There's a good bit of money involved in traveling, depending on what company, what you negotiate. But as I said, negotiations are really up to how creative you want to be, because the technologist has that type of demand. That really how creative you want to be, if you want to get paid per travel or if you want to get paid a higher set salary and just go wherever they tell you to go. That's up to you.
So when you mention that though, are people individually doing their own contracts, or like if you're part of a company, the owner of the company or somebody in the company is doing it and you're just getting paid whatever the company pays you and you're not negotiating each surgical procedure?
Most of the people that do this are on salary. So you get paid a salary of XYZ and not work a whole week, but you still get your salary. It depends on the business at the time. Like for COVID, I was fortunate enough that I was with a big company, and I mean, we didn't work for a whole month, but we didn't lose a penny. We all still got our salary. That wasn't the case for, smaller companies weren't able to do that.
What would somebody, they're in college, it sounds like this requires a bachelor's degree, along with certification. So they're in college. Would they look for certain schools that offer these programs, or could they be in any school and remotely get into a program, or would they have to move to that school?
There are about 4 or 5 different institutions now that offer a path for you to get your certification while you're getting your bachelor's. Michigan, Pittsburgh, I think UConn, I think has like a master's program for what we do. While they get their bachelor's degree, they do the extra hours. They get to go to surgery while they're in college. And when they graduate, they're certified. They're ready to go. It's obviously not going to be available to everybody, very few people. The best way to go is find a company that's hiring in your area or whatever area you would like to move to. And you get hired by them. Most of these companies have some sort of training program, along with the accredited educational platforms available online. The companies will bring you to surgery, get you into the hospitals. You follow somebody around. again, a minimum of 150 surgeries that you have to sit in on. Takes, depending on how busy they are, it can take up to a year, maybe longer. Once you have met all the requirements to sit for the exam, you can sit for the exam, but you won't be able to work on your own until you have that certification. Other programs, I think there's a way now where you may not need a master's if you go through, there's a couple of big, large companies. I used to work for one that have fellowship programs that are accredited. So if you go through their program, I don't think you need a bachelor's, but I do know that they're pretty selective. I mean, there's a large numbers of applicants, and it's, about 15 candidates that they take per year. Those programs, you go through them, it takes about a year. You're going to surgery, following somebody around, and you're doing a curriculum on the side. Pretty demanding. When you come out, you're ready to go. Getting into one of these programs to get certified, the good ones, it's very competitive. Like I said, mostly, and not just a bachelor's, but some kind of background in medicine, something, and you do interviews, and, you gotta stand out and kind of, stick you out. They get very competitive.
After you have your degree and you get into the certification, and let's say you're just kind of like you're hell bent on, getting on through it, or you drag it out. You could, I guess there's probably a window you don't want to drag it out too long, but what's kind of a shortest and like fastest or longest time frame you have to work with that says, okay, from when I get my 4 year, get into the field and start, I want to get to that point where I'm making some good starting base pay. Like, what's that window of time frame? Like 1 year, 2 years, 5?
A good window will probably range from like 6, 7 months to a year.
And are they paying you while you're in that process? Is that the goal?
The big company I used to work for used to pay you 40,000 a year to train.
All right, so you're getting something,
Yes, yes.
something while
There
you're
are
in
some
training.
smaller companies out there that they can't afford to, and they're like, mostly in rural areas. They're gonna be like, no, we're not gonna pay you. We're gonna pay you very little.
Do you have to requalify over any periods of time?
Yes. 5 years. Every 5 years, you don't have to take the exam again. You just have to have a certain numbers. I think it's 60, 40 or 60. I can't remember numbers of continuing education from accredited sources. Some of the bigger companies have started offering online webinars that if you register for and you stay in on, you get 1 or 2 hours for that. ASET, which is the American Society of Electroneural Technologists, they have a conference every year in a different city. It's a whole weekend. You get like 20 hours or something like that. There's little journals that they come out with every month, that at the end of the journal, there's a little test. You submit those, you get like half a credit, something like that. But there's various ways to keep up with it. If you fail to meet those hours within that time period, you're going to have to recertify and take the test.
So we've talked about the beginning stages. We've talked about what you do in the middle, then how requalifying. Where does this kind of set you up for, like one version of it is you go into surgeries every day, is that one option, is that somebody just does their whole career, or where's the opportunity for growth or getting other things that keep it interesting other than just I'm here again today, Groundhog Day, over and over and over?
There are some people that love the Groundhog Day, but there's definitely opportunity for growth, especially salary wise. As I said, you become very valuable to an organization if you're good at what you do and you gain the respect of your surgeon and you command their business. My previous job, I worked with a very busy surgeon here in this town, and he was switching companies. He brought me along. He kind of said, pay him what he wants. If you're good at what you do, salary wise, you can, make the most of it. Career wise, so there's, people that do certain types of procedures, like I said, mostly spine. There are higher skilled technologists that do a lot of craniotomies and do a lot of the really more complex stuff. People that really get into specialized areas. Those people tend to love research. They tend to love leading up fellowship programs for these big companies. There's, within these big companies, there's all sorts of different management positions. Management is usually done by trained technologists. As I said, my previous job, I managed the whole region. All the managers for all the different regions were all technologists. The vice president of that company started off as a technologist. So there's definitely different, depending on the company that you work for. Those big, large companies, there's a lot of room for management, rehab management, and heading up fellowship programs, things like that. One of my really good friends is the head of the fellowship program at that large company, and she loves it. She loves research. My career, it took me to ownership. I started my own company a few years ago, and that's where I'm at. In states where you don't have to be an MD to be an owner of one of these companies. Most of the owners are technologists that kind of took it to that next level.
What are some of the job titles? If I was to go to Indeed or LinkedIn, what would be some keywords that I would look for to find some job openings so somebody would have an example of here's a description of these jobs that people are hiring, and this is how different companies describe them.
Intraoperative neuromonitoring. If you go to LinkedIn and you go to intraoperative neuromonitoring, you're going to get a lot of help wanted in it. Some are going to be management positions. Some are going to be intro level. Some are going to be, looking for a trainee. Some are going to be who require a lot of experience.
And that's kind of what I was getting at with it. People will see that, they'll get a well-rounded view of like, are there 5 job openings? That's all I can find, or wow, there's 500 job openings.
Say you go to LinkedIn and you type that in, you see ads from like Empower or Specialty Care, which are two very large companies. It depends on where they need help. They might be advertising we need help, but they need help in various different cities. So depending on what's best suited, I have different options there.
Are there specific to the intraoperative neuromonitoring, are there specific societies like for mentorships? I've talked to some people, and I've seen this more in the engineering world. I'm an electrical engineer. A lot of people do internships, co-ops, stuff like that. But I've seen a couple on the medical side where they do have like the internships or you get your hours in a room, but they also have specific medical societies where they do mentorships and things like that. Is there anything like that in intraoperative neuromonitoring?
The closest thing I can think of is ASET, which is the American Society of Electrical Neurotechnologists. What they provide is kind of like resources. If you go to ABRIT is another one that will give you a list of accredited sources that if you want to apply to one of those, so they have the links right there, or the courses that they accept. ASET and ABRIT are going to be the two major ones. And ABRIT is the American Board of Registration of Electroencephalographic and Evoked Potential Technologists. And then ASET is going to be the American Society of Electroneurodiagnostic Technologists. ASET is going to give you a lot of resources. They have memberships. I pay for a membership. I have access to their courses every year and their directory. You can find all the registered and certified technologists around the country on there.
Is there anything you would have done different now that you've been in it for a while, that now that you know what you know?
I probably wouldn't have wasted my first 10 years at the first company that I was with. I'd just stay there. They didn't really offer much of growth wise.
You know that now, but how did you know that while you were in it?
It was hard. That's probably why I stayed in it for so long, because it wasn't a bad gig. I made pretty good money. They were kind of like a large company. They operated like a small company, kind of like mom and pops. And I wasn't unhappy or anything there. It's just, I didn't realize, once I got out there and I got into a bigger organization, saw the different opportunities as far as like managing, regional manager, fellowship programs and all that kind of stuff that you could be a part of. And I really learned more about the industry at the larger companies than I had, and kind of like what propelled me to want to start my own thing.
What would you say is that you enjoy the most about what you do? Like, what keeps you in it? What makes you happy about doing it?
It's a very social job. You're not in a cubicle. You're interacting with people all day long. You're hardly ever by yourself unless it's late at night and you're waiting for a case to start and you're in a lounge somewhere just waiting. But yeah, I enjoy the social aspect of it. I enjoy when I make a difference. I really enjoy doing the scoliosis surgeries. Most of these are going to be little kids, preteens. Some of them are going to have other issues going on, cerebral palsy, that kind of stuff. And it's just very sweet. It can be tough, but I enjoy making a difference and knowing I saw something here that potentially saved this child from being paralyzed. That's very rewarding.
I hadn't thought of it that way. Like you mentioned the word intraoperative neuromonitoring, and that's not where my mind goes. So that's pretty neat to hear the human personal aspect of it.
The flip coin of that is when things do go bad and you're in with a little child, that can be gut wrenching, but it can be very rewarding, and I enjoy that a lot.
Hopefully, somebody tuning in here and maybe it sparks an interest. Well, thanks a lot, and tell your family thanks for sharing you.
Of course. Yeah, we'll do. Good talking to you, Chris.
If you like what you hear and want to take the next steps in exploring your career after listening to an episode, go to jobguppy.com to see a summary and helpful links to things mentioned during the interview, like industry-specific forums or websites, example job searches, career ladders, and degree programs or trade school recommendations. The hope is you now have more information than you did before from the guest on the podcast to help you move forward with the next steps on your career exploration journey. Tune in each week as JobGuppy continues to explore a million jobs in the sea.